Ah, yes, the infamous 2008 Brickyard 400, where tires blowing out after just a few laps caused NASCAR to throw constant competition cautions to prevent any incidents related to the tire issues. And while some will claim it's the worst race ever, and it was definitely embarrassing for the sport, were you not at least entertained? Look, I like bad movies. Not the boring bad movies, the movies that are so bad they're actually good. The ones that try hard, but bad acting, bad writing, bad editing, and bad special effects make the experience super entertaining. Movies like The Room, Samurai Cop, and Roadhouse. I don't care if the plot doesn't make any sense. I'm watching it for the pure ridiculousness, and that's why I'll argue that the 2008 Brickyard 400 is so bad, it's actually good. So let's dig into that weekend's events at Indianapolis a bit further and see what went wrong, how the mitigation attempt unfolded, and the aftermath of one of the biggest tire disasters in racing history. Goodyear held a tire test at the track in April 2008, with Brian Vickers, Kurt Busch, and Dale Earnhardt Jr. participating. However, Goodyear opted to not bring the tire from that session because of concerns about grip. Wear was okay, but the three drivers mentioned handling would become a big issue. Instead, they brought the same tire used in the 2007 race, as it was a known quantity. With the car of tomorrow debuting at the track, the car and tire combination would be left untested until practice opened the weekend of the race, which would prove to be a poor decision. In hindsight, of course. Goodyear's tire notes for the race included the following, which was not listed in the 2007 notes. The chief tire issue expected this weekend is expected early in practice as teams put down a layer of rubber on the abrasive racing surface. As typically seen on the grooved racing surface at Indianapolis, tire wear is expected to be high during the early practice sessions. This was something that would be talked about during the early practice sessions, but eventually it would become apparent that rubber wasn't being laid down per expectations. As race weekend began, on Friday, Tony Stewart announced his new number and sponsors for the 2009 season as he moved into his new owner-driver role. He'd choose the number 14 in honor of his hero, A.J. Foyt, and for his sponsors, Office Depot would get 60% of the races, and Old Spice would get 40%. One comment brought up all weekend was that Indianapolis was notorious for wearing tires out in early practice sessions before the track began taking rubber, which would increase the number of laps run on a set of tires. The first practice of the day saw very few cars run more than 5 consecutive laps, with Jeff Gordon running 8 laps with major cording occurring. The only incident in first practice was Sam Hornish going for a spin. Elliott Sadler was fast, leading the first practice session with the Chevys of Jimmie Johnson, Jeff Gordon, and Mark Martin also high on the speed charts. As second practice began, everyone was expecting the track to start taking rubber. In an interview, Elliott Sadler said he wasn't concerned about the tire wear, thinking it'd be fine as the weekend progressed. Many times throughout the weekend coverage, ESPN mentioned that 12 of the 14 Brickyard winners were also Cup Series champions, with Ricky Rudd and Kevin Harvick being the only two who hadn't. Dr. Jerry Punch called out that Harvick would be a future champion, and in 6 years' time, his prediction would come true. Jimmie Johnson and Jeff Gordon would be fast again, and the only two drivers to eclipse the 180 mile per hour average speed mark in second practice. Saturday began with qualifying, and talk about tires during the session was minimal. Mark Martin brought up the topic himself when in the ESPN pit studio, but he chalked it up to the cars not running very many laps during the first 2 practice sessions. Once they do some race runs in Saturday's 2 practice sessions and get an entire fuel run during the race Sunday, it should improve, according to Mark. Jimmie Johnson won the pole, with Mark Martin taking the outside front row in a rather uneventful session. Tire talk ramped up in the third practice. ESPN pit reporter Jamie Little noticed that excessive tire dust was being picked up by the cars and took some off the bumper of Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s car, comparing it to coffee grounds. After just 7 laps, Jr.'s tires were worn down to the cords, although he was still confident that the track would take rubber. ESPN analyst Andy Petrie believed that by the second run of the day, they'd get twice as many laps as their first runs, and the run after that, they'd be doing full fuel runs. Late in practice, Carl Edwards was interviewed, and he was much more concerned than others we'd heard from about the lack of rubber being laid down, as they were still burning up tires in just 5 laps. Carl, running double duty that weekend, would change plans and decide to stay for final practice instead of heading to ORP for Nationwide Series qualifying. After hearing Carl's comments, Andy Petrie pivoted and was then concerned about the tire wear. However, his booth mate Dale Jarrett still believed rubber would be laid down as normal. Jeff Gordon led third practice as most drivers completed 15 to 20 laps, but also used 3 or 4 sets of tires to get there. In the 30 minutes between practices, a number of drivers visited the NASCAR hauler to voice their concerns about the tires and see if there was a solution. Both Ryan Newman and Mark Martin were concerned about having enough tires to get through the next practice session. Mark had used up 4 sets of tires in just the 1-hour third practice, but still didn't think it was a big issue for the race itself. With a combined 7 Brickyard 400 victories at the time, interviews with Jeff Gordon, Chad Knaus, and Greg Zipadelli gave us different viewpoints on the potential issues. Gordon was concerned about the tire wear, but also hopeful that the track would take rubber, and was more concerned with having enough tires for the race than final practice. Knaus just thought everything was pretty normal, and that this is just what we got at Indianapolis. And Zipadelli was worried about the amount of rubber coming off tires getting everywhere, both on and in the car, and causing mechanical issues. While a lot of drivers and crew chiefs interviewed were positive about the track rubbering in, most of it felt more hopeful than something they truly believed. It seemed like something was clearly going on because the issues wouldn't have been talked about as much if it were a normal Indianapolis weekend. Once final practice began, NASCAR VP of Competition, Robin Pemberton, said they'd give teams an extra set of tires for the race, bringing the total to 10 sets for each team. He also mentioned that being the only series at the track that weekend, it takes quite a bit of time to rubber in the track. The only incident of final practice occurred when Robbie Gordon went up in flames in turn 1. It looked like an engine or fuel issue initially, but in Robbie's interview, he said he just got out of the groove and into the marbles, and since there was so much dust out there, it got onto the headers and the car erupted in flames. Jamie Little had talked to Robin Pemberton again, and he said that instead of getting 5 to 6 laps before cording, like in the early practice sessions, they were up to 11 consecutive laps, which wasn't far off where they were last year. Tim Brewer in the ESPN Tech Center had obtained a bunch of tire dust picked up by the sweepers, which is something he said he'd never seen before. Once again, Jimmie Johnson and Jeff Gordon paced final practice, and it looked like the Hendrick cars were going to be tough to beat come Sunday. Early in the pre-race show, Alan Bestwick reported NASCAR would throw a competition caution at lap 10 to allow teams to check tires, and would continue to do that at yet-to-be-determined intervals until they felt the surface was rubbered in enough where cars could race under normal conditions without the need for more competition cautions. Bestwick also reported an additional 400 sets of tires, which were to be raced at Pocono the following week, were brought in by Goodyear just in case teams used all 10 Indianapolis spec tire sets, if needed. NASCAR would implement the Pocono tires unilaterally across the field if the time came. Jimmie Johnson led the field to green and into the unknown, holding the lead in the early going. On just the second lap, there was a 4-wide battle down the backstretch, so not everyone was just taking it easy, trying to save tires. On lap 4, Michael Waltrip got loose under Sam Hornish in turn 2, spun, hit Paul Menard, and then the wall, and both their days were all but over. Here's where things got interesting with strategy. While most cars didn't pit under caution, others throughout the field did, with Dale Earnhardt Jr., the highest runner in 8th, coming to pit road. Their plan was to stay out for the lap 10 competition caution. NASCAR ended up moving the original lap 10 competition caution to lap 14, but right before they could get there, Kurt Busch got loose off turn 1 and collected Kevin Harvick. 2 cars chose not to pit, including Earnhardt, who inherited the lead. Most frontrunners opted for 2 right side tires at this time, and Jimmie Johnson's leading car already had cords showing after just the 7 or 8 laps of green flag racing. Once the green flag came back out, NASCAR announced lap 32 would be the next competition caution, which would be a 14-lap run. That seemed pretty optimistic, and we'd soon see why. By lap 26, Earnhardt would have a tire going down. He ran about 12 green flag laps, and would actually be the first tire failure of the day. At that point, NASCAR moved up the competition caution to lap 30. 3 laps after Earnhardt's issue, Mark Martin would pit. Initially, it was thought to be a strategy call before the caution, but it ended up being a tire issue as well. Juan Pablo Montoya then had a right rear tire completely blow out, and the caution had to be thrown for debris. Jimmie Johnson, who was running second at the time, told his team over the radio that he could see leader Jeff Gordon's right rear tire coming apart through the corners. Most cars took 4 tires on their pit stops, but Kyle Busch took 2 to come out with the lead. A lap after the restart, Jeff Gordon grabbed the lead. A lap after that, Jimmie Johnson took the lead, and NASCAR announced the next competition caution for lap 47, which would be a 12-lap run. On lap 46, Mark Martin would have another issue, pitting a lap before the competition caution again. A lap later, Carl Edwards would have a tire going down, while Matt Kenseth, like Montoya, would have a complete blowout at the same time, spinning and bringing out the caution with extensive damage to his right rear. Through the midpoint of the race, ESPN conducted interviews with Goodyear's Greg Stucker and NASCAR's Mike Helton. Nothing of note was really mentioned, just that they had enough tires to finish the race, and they would like to put the calls in the team's hands at some point. Although, if the situation didn't improve, they'd still throw the competition cautions. Jimmie Johnson would pit for 4 tires nearly every caution period, and while he'd come out behind other cars, almost every time he'd wind up with the lead by the time the caution flew again. Johnson and Gordon looked like the cars to beat at this point in the race. By the 100-lap mark, NASCAR began closing pit road 2 laps before the competition cautions to prevent pitting early to gain track position. This really was a day of making up rules on the fly. NASCAR also called a quickie caution on this one, meaning all cars could come in when the pits opened instead of just lead lap cars. However, this caution was actually the longest of the day, lasting 7 laps. Maybe the sweepers cleaning up the tire debris increased the caution length? At this point, Dr. Jerry Punch said Goodyear's trucked in 200 sets of tires for the Pocono race, contradicting the pre-race report that it was 400 sets. On the lap 106 restart, while going for the lead, Jeff Burton got a 2-for-1 discount on some poultry on the front stretch. But unlike Dale Earnhardt's Seagull smash at Daytona in 1991, no damage was apparent to his car. By the 300-mile mark, it looked like favorites Johnson and Gordon had some competition. Carl Edwards was looking much stronger, passing Jeff Gordon for second before the lap 122 competition caution. Taking 2 tires on that pit stop, Denny Hamlin came out with the lead and held it throughout the run. Hamlin took 2 tires again on the following stop and led that segment as well. Johnson took 4 tires and started 9th, getting back to 3rd by the lap 150 competition caution, with Edwards close behind. On the last stop of the day, all the contenders took 2 tires. Johnson gained 2 spots and Edwards 3 spots to come out first and second. Previous leader Hamlin came out 3rd after Reed Sorensen knocked a tire out of his tire carrier's hands. On the final restart, with just 7 laps to go, Johnson and Edwards pulled away from the rest of the field, and while they looked about even, Edwards couldn't get close enough to make a move, and Jimmie Johnson won the 2008 Brickyard 400, his second victory there in just 3 years. Goodyear needed extensive post-race analysis to figure out why these tires didn't perform as expected, since they were the same ones used the previous year when there were no issues. Stu Grant, Goodyear's general manager of worldwide racing, explained those results, and to quote him, "To make a long story short, what we found out was that the additional load and slip that the right rear tire saw changed the particle size of the wear debris. Instead of seeing the rubbered-in racetrack like we saw in 2006 and 2007 on that compound, the particle size was so much smaller. If you were here, you saw it. It was this dry, dusty wear, and consequently, the track never did rubber in. So basically, the car of tomorrow and the loads it produced wore the rubber differently than the previous generation car. We had seen tire issues earlier in the season at other tracks, but not to this extent. Going back to what I mentioned earlier in the video, Goodyear did test at the track in April 2008 with 3 drivers, but didn't bring the tire used in that session. Extensive tire testing was conducted at Indianapolis before the 2009 Brickyard 400. Over 7 separate sessions, 3 in September and October 2008, 2 in April 2009, and 2 in June 2009, cars ran over 14,000 test miles, and Goodyear was able to provide a tire for the 2009 Brickyard 400 that performed without issue. However, despite all the time and money that went into fixing the tires for future races, both Goodyear's and the Brickyard 400's reputations took a hit. Attendance in 2008 was 240,000. By the next year, it had fallen to 180,000, the steepest decline in the event's history. While attendance had already started declining by 2008, after the tire disaster, the decline accelerated, eventually falling to just 70,000 by 2013. With the prestige of the Brickyard decreasing along with the attendance, NASCAR made the move to run the Indianapolis road course in 2021. While it was interesting to see the stock cars on the road course there, it just didn't feel right. To me, it felt like a demotion. After 3 years running the road course, in 2024, the oval returned to the schedule in the 30th anniversary year of the inaugural Brickyard 400. So, was the 2008 Brickyard 400 actually so bad it was good? From a strictly racing purist standpoint, absolutely not. It was just bad. It was hard to watch with the constant cautions and made worse with the sanctioning body interfering with the flow of the race. And it was just embarrassing overall. But from an entertainment standpoint, definitely. The racing between the caution flags was actually pretty solid for Indianapolis, and of course the tire issues caused chaos. You didn't know who would be next to have issues or what strategies teams would employ to gain track position or set themselves up for the end of the race. I'm on the entertainment side of the argument, and I enjoyed it, but I'd also rather watch Samurai Cop than any other random movie. So, do you think the 2008 Brickyard 400 was so bad it was actually good? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to smash those like and subscribe buttons.